We will now move on to the Q&A segment with DPM Heng, which will be moderated by Warren. Now, for those who are joining us via Zoom, send us your questions via the Q&A function.
Thanks, Arianto. And thank you, DPM, for that very comprehensive and thought-provoking speech. I was especially struck by the 3 areas of collaboration that you've set out. But I thought it'd be interesting to start by setting your remarks in a sort of context of recent developments so that it's situated in things that have happened recently. I mean, the events of the last week have been quite stunning. You know, the storming of the Capitol, the Democrats taking back the Senate, and then on the other side of the earth, the move against the opposition figures in Hong Kong, and then the very strong remarks about Taiwan. All of which I wonder, in your mind, does it make the possibility of a reset in US-China relations something we can be more hopeful or more anxious about?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Warren, for organizing this and for this question. First, I would agree with you that the events in the last week or so has been quite dramatic, in particular the storming of the Congress. But I think it also shows the strength of the American institutions, the belief in the Constitution and belief in doing the right thing. So eventually Senate reconvened and did what they were required to do under the Constitution. And Vice President Pence himself, for instance, took very firm decisions. So I think there is a strength in the American system which augurs well for the US. But at the same time, the storming indicates, sort of shows how deeply divided the American society is. And this is not something new. I mean, it has been growing for many years now. There's a very sharp divide in American society, divides over economic opportunities, divide over issues of culture, issues of race, and so on. So I would say that in the case of the US, President-elect Biden will have a full plate because the domestic agenda is going to be very significant. And he would have to, and with the control of both houses, of the Senate and now both houses, I hope that he can, together with his team, bring America together to effect the right policies and to bring the American people together to bridge some of this divide. Now, in the case of China, while the protest in Hong Kong is one manifestation of it, China itself is a very big country. It has a population of almost 1.4 billion people. And different parts of China are developed to different degree. So there's a big agenda that China would have to do in terms of its development of the country, development of the region. We see the GDP of China in absolute terms, but actually on the per capita terms, is still they are still working through many of these issues. You see disparity between the developments in the major city, which are really first-tier cities, versus the countryside. And one major issue that China will have to deal with is a rapidly aging population. And the effects of a rapidly aging population will be felt in the coming years. And we'll have to, the Chinese leadership will have to devote significant amount of time and resources to deal with these challenges, the challenges of development, challenges of an aging population. And so both sides, both the US and China, will have significant domestic issues that they will need to focus their minds on. But at the same time, as I mentioned in my speech, both they are the 2 largest economies in the world. They have the most military spending. They have the most advanced in many of this work, especially the Americans in the R&D. Mm-hmm. And in the future, that's more driven by technology. There will be lots of things that we need to do. But at the same time, I hope that both parties can come together to work on common areas to provide global leadership for the issues that I spoke about. I just mentioned 3, but there are many more. And for them to play a constructive role in the global arena, to bring other countries together to deal with these very pressing challenges that are affecting all of humanity.
You spoke about the need for both cooperation and competition.
Yes.
A bit of yin and yang, so to speak.
Yes, indeed.
And I think the 3 areas you've identified make eminent sense. But maybe we could start talking about the vaccination, which you did say was one of the areas we're going to have to focus on this year. But given it's been a phenomenal feat of science to have discovered the vaccinations.
It is.
The vaccines, but the implementation is now the challenge.
Right.
And what we're seeing is more a national effort by many countries. What do you think it will take to bring more of that international collaboration? Who do you think might play a role? Is it the WHO? Is it ASEAN? Or is there a role Singapore could play in that effort?
Yeah. Well, indeed, I think the nature of this pandemic is the clearest illustration of how no country is safe unless everyone else is safe. And it is very important for us. It is a burning platform for us to cooperate at the international level. And there, I would say that if you have a vaccine nationalism, it will be very troubling for the world. And it will not serve each country's own interest either. Because if you do that and other countries still have a raging problem, we will not be able to resume much of the activities across border, and the world is much more interconnected. So what can we do? Well, the WHO set up this facility, this access to tools, right? On this access to COVAX tool, and part of it, for example, one part of it has got to do with the COVAX facility. It is to advocate for vaccine multilateralization. And as part of the COVAX facility, Singapore and Switzerland co-chairs this COVAX facility. We are friends of the co-chairs is Friends of COVAX. And we've been working together with 13 other members, there are all 15 members in it, to look at how we can promote vaccine multilateralization. And I'm glad that they've raised over $2.4 billion, I think, for this facility already, and several countries as well as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have donated to this. So this is a good start. So I believe that we must continue to promote this vaccine multilateralization, and at the same time, the nature of this vaccine is such that it is not just the funding or the fact that these are available, but you need to base it on good science. At the same time, the complexity is in the distribution, because you have to ensure that in the distribution process, the vaccine remains effective and that is not damaged. So Singapore, I hope, can also play a small role in the distribution of this vaccine. We are part of we have a very good logistics chain with many other countries in the region. So I hope that COVAX facility and this Friends of COVAX will be able to bring more people on board, and that we continue to promote this vaccine multilateralization, and that we support the WHO in this effort.
We've got a lot of interesting questions coming in from the audience, but let me take a question about Singapore specifically. I mean, you spoke about the unusual year we had, where we had to learn to do things digitally, or we had to sort of work from home, or even hold events like this virtually. I wonder, in your mind, what are some of the measures that we might take to sort of embed the upsides, the learnings that we've had from this very unusual year, so that it becomes some positives come out of this process?
Yes. Well, I'll say the first, the major lesson to learn from this is that change will always happen, and sometimes change happens, change gets accelerated, and sometimes you have sudden changes which shock you, in ways which we might not have prepared for. So I would say that it's just like during the global financial crisis, you find that suddenly the whole financial system seized up, and you begin to put in place measures to improve the resilience of the financial system, to improve the robustness of many of the policies. And I'm glad that, again, that was a very good way for the international community to come together, because finance is so global, that it is that flow. You have to do things within country and across countries to have a common set of rules. So that's been helpful. So learning from the same lesson, I would say that there are a number of things we need to do. One is that we'll have to all take risk management more seriously. And one part of this risk management is I mentioned that disease X is not a matter of if, but when.
That sounds very ominous.
Yes, I mean, so we have to prepare and look at how we can continue to prepare for this and strengthen our international cooperations in managing sudden shocks like this. And the pandemic, if you compare what happened this time with what happened in the Spanish flu, I think our response this time around was a lot better. So I hope that international cooperation can continue. But in terms of, and of course we will have to review what are some of the measures we did. I visited a number of our hospitals during this pandemic and saw how they had been able to put up new measures to, especially in, for example, ICU facilities and so on, to better take care of our people. So those are important lessons in the healthcare area. But I will also add that in the economic area, a number of changes are being accelerated. The first is really the importance of technology, innovation, and in particular digitalization. As you say, we couldn't have had this meeting without the digital technology. And digital technology will grow in its reach and impact. And that is why I think one important area for us to master is how we can make fuller use of technology, innovation, and particularly digital technology, whether it is in the way that we do many of these activities, and perhaps explore what kind of hybrid may be most productive and fulfilling for people, whether it is the way we work from home versus we work in office. I think there are advantages and disadvantages in both sides, but is there a hybrid format that allows us to maximize? For instance, I think providing greater flexibility for staff will be one area that will be useful in certain settings, not all. I mean, if you're in a factory setting, it may be difficult, but certain flexibility. But also in the digital area, that many of these trends will be accelerated. So that's one. And two, we have to rethink the way we work. Because in the middle of the pandemic, I decided to set up the Emerging Stronger Task Force to look at what are the economic changes that will be accelerated by COVID-19. And the Emerging Stronger Task Force decided on a very different approach. They came out with this idea of the Alliances for Action.
Right.
And the Alliances for Action brings or rather each Alliance for Action brings together industry leaders in the area, the union as well as the government agencies, to explore a particular area. And interestingly, many of the areas relate to the themes that I spoke about. One is on sustainability. How can we promote more sustainable growth? And how do we promote a green recovery? Another area has got to do with digitalization. How do we have more secure supply chain? Supply chain will need to be digitalized even more. And our own experience with digitalization of supply chain has been very positive. But the members felt that there were even more areas that we can make a bigger leap in the supply chain. There will be areas on the use of robotics, edutech, and how we can reconfigure the factories and so on. So all those are interesting areas. The key is how that ability to bring people who share common interests to work together. And the more we can do that, the more we can make progress. So digitalization, technology would be one big area. Healthcare, sustainability is another major area. So I will be dealing with some of these issues in greater detail later when we have our budget debate, because we need to rethink how these changes will reshape the global economy and how the Singapore stay relevant in the midst of these changes. But I'm glad that our businesses we started our industry transformation maps 5 years ago, and over the last 5 years, the industry leaders and the unions have worked very hard to make some of these changes. So as I said, change hopefully is a useful reminder to everyone that change will always happen. It may happen faster, it may be slower, it may come about suddenly and give us a shock, but having that mental flexibility to prepare for changes and to be able to innovate will be critical to our future.
DPM, you're also the finance minister, and inevitably quite a few of the questions relate to the economy, especially given the uncertainties internationally this year. So quite a few of the questions, and I'm grouping them together, relate to how the markets don't like uncertainty, and this is a year especially when there is a hell of a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. How do you see the economy going forward over the course of the year? Do you think we will get out of recession by the end of the year?
Well, I think the way for us to deal with uncertainty is to do our best to assess what is the most likely scenario, what is the central scenario for the economy and for the and then to look at what may be potential upside, which might surprise us in a pleasant way, and what are the potential downsides for which we may have to be better prepared. So I think companies will all have to deal with it in a much more open and flexible way, that there is a central scenario. And in the case of the Singapore economy, I'll say that with the vaccination that is going on around the world, there is a global consensus that the global economy may recover in the second half of this year. And so our central scenario is that that the first half will still not be very good, but the second half we may begin to see some uptick in activities. But even then, the world has lost a significant part of the GDP, and even if that scenario pans out, you will still likely be below the 2019 level. So that is the scenario that we have to plan on. But could there be upside? Yes, if the vaccination turns out to be very effective across the world and we are able to get over this COVID situation. Will there be downside? Yes, because I mentioned two. One is that if you have an escalation of US-China tension, this is going to have a dampening effect on the global economy. And two, the COVID situation, because the vaccination does not work out as we had hoped. It's one of those tail events that we have to consider. And of course, there could be some other events that could intervene in the meanwhile. So we have to keep our minds open and watch for new risks that could emerge. But our central scenario is that we are likely to stage a slow recovery in the second half of this year.
So I'll leave the rest of it for your budget speech and not jump too much ahead.
Yes,
but maybe I could turn to the three areas of possible collaboration that you spoke about.
Right.
We've touched on the public health and vaccination. What about climate change? I mean, this has been the sort of, in a way, sleeper issue this year because we've been so distracted by the coronavirus. But it is a major challenge. And how do you see that playing out in the course of this year? Do you think the world community will recognize the need to come together to work more aggressively on it?
I'm very hopeful that the global community will address this issue much more seriously post-pandemic, and in particular this year. One important reason is that President-elect Joe Biden has indicated that America will come back to the climate change, to the Paris Agreement, and this is a big positive step. And as I said, America and China are the two biggest emitters of carbon dioxide in the world. So if they provide some of this global leadership, it will be helpful. And the other area which I'm hopeful is that I've been in discussion with many of our researchers and scientists. There's a lot of work going on what are some of the measures we can take to deal with this carbon. I mentioned in my speech about carbon sequestration and storage. We ourselves are looking at some of these measures, including the possibility of using mangrove trees to around our coast to see how well it can absorb carbon. There are lots of work going on more efficient energy sources and also renewable energy. There's a huge amount of research going on renewable sources of energy, whether it is hydro, photovoltaic cells, and so on. So I would say that, and of course I mentioned about this clean hydrogen. So depending on usage, there are many areas for which we can begin to see signs which this can be done. And we have to continue to put in place these measures for Singapore to ensure that we do that. And as part of our R&D work, we are allocating quite a significant budget to this R&D on the green economy, on from energy efficiency to waste reductions. We ourselves are looking at this zero waste, and waste recycling will be a major part of maintaining biodiversity and maintaining this climate. So there are lots of work going on, and I'm hopeful, and I know that there's a lot more work that is going on all around the world, right, whether it's in US or China or Europe. And in particular, many of our European friends are very, very concerned with this. So it's a good sign that the world is concerned with this.
I'm getting a lot of questions about ASEAN, and both on the vaccination as well as climate change. There is scope for ASEAN to work together.
Yes.
Do you think that's something we could see more emerging this year, ASEAN collaboration? And a related question to that is, I think as Education Minister, you were also very concerned about giving our young people more of a sense of being part of this community, this region. How do we give our people a sense of that it's a partnership across the region, especially with the challenges we face?
Yes. So I think, yes, ASEAN, there is, even in the last few years, a far greater recognition of the importance of ASEAN centrality. And ASEAN is in a region of the world which, our 10 countries of ASEAN have all very different history, culture, heritage, and priorities. But the fact that, as I mentioned in my speech, that many countries were at war with one another not that long ago, but the fact that we are now able to sit together and come to a common agreement on many things is one big step that we have taken in the last 50-odd years. So can ASEAN do more? I say certainly. In the economic area, I'm glad that the ASEAN economic blueprint continues to be discussed and that we are seeking to make advances, because I think generating GDP growth so that you have the resources to manage many of this will be very important. But besides growth, we also have to deal with issues like sustainability and cooperation on managing the pandemic. And I mentioned about some of this COVAX facility. In areas like cybersecurity, we have the ASEAN CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team. So it's very good that in many different areas of ASEAN work, across the three pillars of ASEAN cooperation, the political, the economic, and the social, there's the social culture, there's a lot of progress that is being made. So let us continue to build on that. Now, and I look at the economic projections for ASEAN, generally I think the strength of ASEAN as a region for growth remains relatively intact. So we have to focus on building stronger from this growth. Now, you mentioned about students, and when I was education minister, I was very concerned that our students must have a better understanding of our region and our friends and neighbors. So in fact, I enhanced the number of programs for which they can go to our ASEAN region, as well as to China and in India and the region. So there's a lot of this work that is going on now. I do hope that our young people take an active approach, take an active interest in understanding our region, and our media can also help to develop better understanding of our region, both not just on the economic side, but also on the cultural historical side, to understand that this is actually an extremely interesting and diverse region. And I've been suggesting to the schools when I was education minister that we need to do more programs with our friends and neighbors in the region, rather than to go to far away places. Start to know our neighbors better first. Yeah.
You talked about cybersecurity, so let me pick up that topic. It's a very sort of intriguing question about the phenomenal hacking incident that's taken place, probably one of the worst in history.
Yes.
How does that give us confidence to bring countries to work together on digitalization and cybersecurity, given that you have so much national spying going on?
Well, I think as the digital technology becomes more pervasive, the scope for for more of these cybersecurity incidents will rise. It is an inevitable part of it. We are already seeing that, for example, in the nature of crimes. Even in crime, it used to be that when I was a policeman, you have a lot of street crimes, but now you have a lot of white-collar crimes, including a lot of them done digitally. So whenever there are opportunities, there are also risks, and we'll have to manage the risks. So there are many things that we'll have to do if we want to keep our digital commons a safe place. One is that nationally, domestically, we need to enhance our own cybersecurity work. So we have set up this cybersecurity agency back in 2015, and it's under the Prime Minister's office. At the same time, in last year's budget, I announced $1 billion for us to enhance our cybersecurity and this infrastructure for this. So this $1 billion is allocated over the next 3 years for us to enhance our cybersecurity. But at the same time, as users, as individuals, we must all learn to be much more careful, because things like phishing attempts and all that will always be there. And so that's one area. The other area is that we will need greater global cooperation. I mentioned about ASEAN coming together on this the CERT framework. There are also discussions at the UN on this. And if I may add that it's not just cybersecurity, but I mentioned about AI, because I think the fair and ethical use of AI for much of our work, especially when it affects people, is going to be critical. So let us all come together. It is another of those global commons that we need to build and contribute to, in order for us to be able to have the benefit of this technological change that is coming our way.
I kind of forgot, DPM, that you were a former police officer as well, so I suppose we are in good hands on that answer.
It's something that I'll have to continue learning, because I started as a policeman when it was street crimes.
I think I'd like to bring the discussion back and close with a bit more personal question. I think 2020 was a tough year for everyone, but for you in particular, because you had to do, 4, 5 budgets? And then...
Well, I actually addressed Parliament 6 times, 4 budget statements and 2 ministerial statements.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so many budgets, more than usual. I hope that's not going to be the case this year.
Yes, my wish for this year is 1 budget.
I think the journalists would agree with you on that one. But yes, apart from the budgets, there was also dealing with the pandemic, and yes, you were advising the ministerial inter-ministry committee.
Yes.
And then, of course, there was the general election when you were thrust into one of the hottest possible seats. And I wonder whether, looking ahead to this year, having been through that long haul last year, are you more optimistic? Are you more sanguine that it's going to be easier to get on top of the challenge? Or do you think we're in for just another year of a long slog?
So I mentioned earlier on about our economic planning, and my approach is that it is useful in our mind to have sort of 3 scenarios. My central scenario is that I think this year will be better than last year, mainly because I think the COVID, with the vaccination, there is some hope of bringing the pandemic under some control. But at the same time, if we look at what is happening, and the Straits Times have carried many of these reports on the situation globally, whether Europe in the new era of lockdown, whether it is about the new variant of the virus, or the problems in some other places. And cities and countries which have done well in the earlier phases saw a resurgence. So it is not something that we can wish away. So I would say that we need to take a very realistic approach to this. I am generally an optimistic person. I'm hopeful that we need to work for work for a good central scenario. But we must also be prepared for downsides, and that we just have to prepare ourselves mentally and psychologically that there could be problems like this. And in terms of the upside, it is also possible, and we'll all be very happy when there's upside. But there are also very important work that the country must come together to work together. So I mentioned about this. You mentioned about the general election. I'm glad that the Singaporeans entrust the PAP to continue to govern for the next 5 years. So it is important for us to make the best use of this and to bring Singaporeans and Singapore through this very difficult period now, but also to emerge stronger from this. And there are also long-term challenges that we have to tackle. For instance, I mentioned that our population is aging very rapidly, and we will have to look at how we can continue to take good care of our seniors. I mean, they have contributed so much in the early years of Singapore's independence and development. So we have to look at what we can do in this, and also focus on how we can help our young people access the opportunities. So as an example, an area of work which I am very keen on is as part of our research work, I have added a number of agenda items to our research. One is in the area of not just human health, but the human potential. How can we enable our young people to learn even better, enable our working adults to learn? Because what does it mean to learn as an adult, when you are at work, and how do you continue to stay mentally and physically healthy and socially active as you age? So I think the traditional mode of thinking about life as 3 simple stages: you study, you work, and then you retire. I think that needs a relook, because I think there are many new challenges that our seniors can be engaged in. There are many new challenges that our young people can be engaged in. You mentioned about ASEAN earlier. And so there are lots of interesting opportunities. And the other area which I've added, of course, is the sustainability. Because I think we take climate change very seriously, but we will have to really invest in this area and look at what we can do in Singapore and also what we can do beyond Singapore. And how can we collaborate with people around the world? It is a problem which the global community must come together. So am I more optimistic? I would say that, well, we just need to have a sort of fairly robust attitude and hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst.
Right. So on that optimistic and robust note, I think we should round up today's session. I mean, last year we had you on this panel discussion as well, and hope to have you back again. In the sense that we've discussed what we know, but there's always surprises around the road, and I think that robust attitude to be able to deal with it is something we can all take away from today's session. So thank you, DPM, for being with us.
So I hope to read many good news on the ST page, but be prepared that if there are things that you need to report. But I would just like to end by congratulating you and your team.
Thank you.
For the revamp of the ST, both the print version and the digital version.
Thank you.
I hope that it will continue to inform our readers and engender discussion. And in particular, there's one thing which I will end with, which is that one of the things which I hope we can do more is our Singapore Together movement, to bring Singaporeans together to tackle many of these challenges, but also many interesting opportunities.
Thank you, DPM.
Thank you.
And thank you, and I'll hand you back to Haryanto.